Good evening, folks. Welcome to my this live reading. Sorry if you tuned in to a couple of minutes ago and you just got some really strange crashed thing. But anyway, um, we've started afresh. Tonight I'm going to be reading you my story, "The Girl Who Hated Shakespeare," from the Black Hare Press anthology, School's Inn. You can get that. There is the information underneath. You can get that by going getbook.at /schools in, all one word, no apostrophe. So it reads like school sin. Yeah, which is kind of cool. Thank you for joining me. And again, apologies if it all went a bit wonky a few minutes ago. I don't know what happened. It just kind of froze. And it happened to freeze when I was pulling a really strange face. It'll give you nightmares. Don't watch it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to dive straight into it. Uh, this is The Girl Who Hated Shakespeare. It's just not fair, Cassie pouted. It was the first day back after Christmas, and she wasn't happy, like in the slightest. How come she gets to do it and I get stuck with Macbeth? John winced theatrically. Shouldn't you say the Scottish play? Cassie cut him with a look that could sever limbs at 15 paces. Don't be such a fucking nerd. As her current boyfriend, John had quickly grown accustomed to her savage outbursts. I'm in the top set for drama. Why don't I get to do the interesting play? John knew he was skating on thin ice, but his mouth opened despite his brain telling it not to. Macbeth is pretty interesting, Cass. I don't see the problem. Hey, you might even get to play Lady Macbeth. Cassie's eyes flared with anger as her whole body bristled. Her golden hair, thick with hairspray, seemed to writhe like a nest of vipers. She drew herself up to a full 5'7" and stated flatly, I hate Shakespeare. The calmness of her voice betrayed more than just a hint of underlying malice. Thankfully for John, the bell sounded for the next lesson. He had woodwork, and Cassie had French. This took them in opposite directions. John jumped at his window of escape, pecked her on the cheek, and ran off down the corridor, trailing his tatty rucksack behind him. Cassie barely noticed that he'd gone. She was glaring at the drama notice board of the new term curriculum. She couldn't believe that she was lumbered with Shakespeare again, while her sister Cammy got to do something cool and new, despite being in the B group. It just wasn't fair. The Chambers sisters, Cammy and Cassie, were identical twins, though their similarities were purely cosmetic. Cassie was brilliant at everything. One of those people who didn't even have to try in lessons to end up with good grades. She could practically sleepwalk through exams. Cammy, on the other hand, had the reverse Midas touch. Everything she touched turned to shit. Cammy's frustration at being worse than her sister at literally everything academic had driven her down a path of rebelliousness. The way she saw it, everyone thought she was a loser, so why try and be anything different? Ironically, it was this attitude that had made her extremely popular. She strutted around the school in the shortest of skirts, with a clique of friends and hangers on. Cammy only had to click her immaculately manicured fingers, and the boys, and a smattering of girls, would come running. Despite being identical in looks, Cassie never garnered the same attention. Most of the school found her overachievement and arrogant sense of entitlement distinctly off-putting. The jealousy ran both ways. Cammy was jealous of her twin's success, while Cassie was jealous of her twin's popularity. It didn't help that Cassie's last boyfriend had called her Cammy during an amorous encounter. That was the seed that grew into a sibling rivalry, into an outright loathing and animosity. In her troubled mind, She was convinced that even John was only with her because she looked like her sister. You coming, Cass? Her friend Sharon asked, upon seeing her standing motionless while everyone ran around her like headless chickens. Sharon was one of Cassie's only friends. She, too, was stamped with the unenviable label of teacher's pet. Eh? Cassie blinked. Sharon's question jolted her out of her brooding reverie. Oh, yeah. What period is it? Sharon looked at her dumbfounded. It's period 5, French. Cassie excelled at French. Surprise, surprise. I wanted to go and live in the country some day. She smiled at Sharon and swung her bag over her shoulders. This was a welcome development. Cassie had been using an app on her phone and was pretty much fluent. So while her classmates bumbled around for the correct tense, she could figure out how to get herself moved to the same drama group as her wayward sister. One way or another, she was going to be doing that play. In the end, switching groups proved easier than expected. Are you ready? Cassie stage whispered to John. He was up in the rigging on lights. He shot her a thumbs up and waited for her to get into position, fingers poised over the spotlight controls. They were rehearsing Act 5, Scene 1 of Hamlet, Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth, Cassie, loses her mind. She was directed to sleepwalk over towards where Mr. Davies, her teacher, was standing. As usual, he had draped his jacket over one of the chairs and was pacing up and down, waving his arms around like a demented windmill. Cassie directed a sly wink to the lightning booth once she was directly in front of his teacher's chair. John dexterously dragged all the sliders down simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. John, what the hell are you doing, boy? Mr. Davies boomed. Sorry. John waited as long as he possibly could without sparking suspicion, and then turned the lights back up. Sorry, sir. I think I pressed the wrong button or something. He hoped to God that Cassie had been able to pull off her part of the subterfuge undetected. She was back on her X of tape, as she should be, and had the faintest hint of a smile playing on her lips. It was looking good. Not to worry, John, Mr. Davies smiled. That's why we have these rehearsals, so you don't press the wrong button on the night. He waved his hands at the players. Okay, let's go back to Act 1, Scene 5. Lady Macbeth, he addressed Cassie. Let's see some real fire when you deliver the line, leave all the rest to me. Okay? After the final bell rang, Cassie gathered her things and waited for John to retrieve his stuff from his locker. She made sure that everybody saw her be the last one to leave the drama studio. She thought up some questions pertaining to the dialogue to ask to Mr. Davies, then left the school via the back gate. Did you get it? John asked once they were sure that they were well out of earshot. Cassie grinned triumphantly and reached into her blouse. Sure did. She laughed as she fished Mr. Davies' phone out of her brassiere. So what now? Cassie gave him a coy wink. Leave all the rest to me. 2 days later, Bettles Cove High School was hit by a tsunami of scandal. Cassie had taken the phone belonging to a drama teacher home and put her own number into his phone book. After Googling the sort of things a man of his age might say to a girl of her age, she sent herself some decidedly lascivious text messages. The following day, Cassie had John slip the device back into Mr. Davies' drawer in his form room and then bury it under some paperwork, like it had been there all along. Meanwhile, Cassie turned on the waterworks, let the crocodile tears flow, skipped class, and went running to her mother's place of work. Mrs. Chambers did what all outraged mothers would do after finding a load of filth on her daughter's phone from a teacher. She marched down there, hellfire sparking off her high-heeled shoes, and proceeded to kick up one hell of a fuss. Within minutes of her arrival, the police were summoned, and half the school was calling Mr. Davies a nonce. Luckily for Davies, he had noticed the theft almost immediately after the lesson, and had popped into the police station to report it as stolen on his way home, before Cassie sent the messages. In the end, the phone was found, and it was put down to being the work of a prankster. But it didn't matter either way, as it had achieved the desired effect. Cassie and John had to be moved out of Mr. Davies's class. And ironically, the whole debacle was laid at Cammie's door. Even her parents were convinced that it was her sick way of getting back at her sister. And to have their golden girl moved out of the top set was a disgrace. Cassie was delighted. Delight wasn't what you could call what John was feeling after his first couple of lessons with Mr. Castaigne. I was happier doing Shakespeare, he grumbled, after the eccentric French drama teacher had chewed him out over the hue of his lighting for the 15th time that period. I don't even know what the hell is going on. This play makes 0 sense. Cassie gazed through him at the wall and said distractedly, I hate Shakespeare. Her mind was elsewhere. It had been elsewhere since she'd been hurriedly cast in the lowly role of courtier. John looked at her in a mixture of concern and irritation. Is that it? You hate Shakespeare? This guy's a fucking lunatic. It was true. Mr. Castaigne was definitely unstable at the very least, and at worst he was a raving madman. He seemed to be obsessed with this play. It was an honour, he trumpeted on many occasions, to be the first school to do the yellow play. He never spoke the true title of the piece, like it was some huge cosmic secret. Even the scripts, of which they were only allowed Act 1, had the title roughly scrubbed out with a black marker. Every time he called it the yellow play, his face contorted into a bizarre grimace that could either have been one of mirth or despair. John could never quite put his finger on his unease, but he knew one thing for certain. He would much rather be back in the other group. Mr. Wilde! Castaigne boomed up to the lighting gantry. Are you awake up there? John had been daydreaming. Cassie's trance-like state was mirrored by the rest of the class, and he was the only one, it seemed, that wasn't under the spell of the bombastic teacher. Sorry, sir, he called back down. Castaigne grumbled to himself as he fanned himself with the script. His eyes darted from pupil to pupil before settling on Steve Scott, Cammie's boyfriend. You, he indicated with a stubby finger. Could you perhaps get the colour yellow to follow the main character, unlike that idiot up there? Steve answered in a flat monotone. Yes, Mr. Castaigne. John noticed that his eyes were glazed and bloodshot, like they had just witnessed some kind of unimaginable horror. Very well. Castaigne clicked his fingers with a theatrical flourish. You two swap places. As the two boys did as instructed. Let's see if you can act better than you can press buttons and twiddle knobs. The glare of the yellow light burned into his retinas as it reflected off the script that had been hastily thrust into his hands. You have very few lines, Castaigne briefed him enthusiastically, but it's the most important role. You are honoured. Honoured! Don't forget that. Yes, Mr. Castaigne. As he spoke, he could feel his girlfriend's eyes burning holes through his back. Cassie, at once galvanized into action by John's promotion, had almost instantly started a campaign of diabolical proportions to get herself the lead female role. It was her role, after all. Cammy was cast in her perfect role as the lead's twin sister. It was too much like fate for her to ignore. And then there were the names. The girl in the lead role was one of her sister's cronies, Victoria Worthington. She was a tall, muscular girl who could beat up most of the boys and never mind the girls, so intimidation was out of the question. Since changing groups, the yellow play had become her Bible. That short first act, with its evocative chorus parts and brooding nature, spoke to her in ways that the other literature never had. Every waking moment, she ruminated on the message within the play. Even when she slept, her dreams were bathed in yellow. As she sat alone at the edge of the football field one wet lunchtime, Cassie happened to spot a forlorn-looking figure on the opposite side. The field was out of bounds during wet weather, and it wasn't a teacher that stood there. All she could make out was a figure clad from head to toe in a tattered yellow gown. She couldn't see its face, just a gaping black void under a drooping hood. Cassie found herself mesmerized by the apparition. As she sat, clutching her precious script to her chest and shielding it from the downpour, the figure pointed a long, bony finger at her. The sky seemed to shift and fast forward. The shadows of the trees that bordered the school shifted and danced on the grass. As she stared transfixed on the figure, the shadows split from the trees and gathered around the figure in yellow. Visions of twin moons and a still black lake flashed into her mind. The shadows now spread from under the tattered yellow robe, writhing and squirming like tentacles. Chambers, what are you doing on the field? The shrill whistle and the even shriller voice of Mrs. Green, the PE teacher, startled Cassie. She looked around. The teacher was coming her way, reaching for the detention slips. When Cassie looked back, the figure had gone. After a sound rollicking from the headmaster, Cassie headed to class. On the way, Mr. Castaigne pulled her aside and handed her the script for Act 2. After suffering through the worst fate known to a student, double maths, Cassie had gone to the gym to serve her detention. As was usual in these situations, Victoria Worthington was also there. This was normal. Her demeanour wasn't. The usually cocksure girl was shaky and pale-looking. Her eyes were filled with an emotion that Cassie didn't think she possessed: fear. In front of her, next to the sheet of lines she had been instructed to copy off the board and printed on lurid yellow paper, was the second act of the play. Cassie waited until Mrs. Green had left them alone to attend to some other matter, then retrieved her own copy of the script from her bag. It wasn't long, but what was written changed Cassie's life in an instant. She chuckled to herself as she turned the pages, her laugh getting more and more manic with every word she read. Across the cavernous gymnasium, Victoria stared at her in terror. A hand was scribbling words on the page in front of her without her even knowing. Suddenly, Cassie stopped laughing and fixed her with a look that wouldn't have looked out of place on a vulture. Tears started to roll down Victoria's face as Cassie reached for her pencil case, never once taking her eyes off her prey. Cassie unzipped it and took out a yellow highlighter pen. With a savage swish, she drew a strange symbol on the paper she had been given. Victoria cried and gibbered as Cassie held up the paper. She gazed at the symbol in abject terror before taking her fountain pen, holding it to her left eye, and slamming her face into the desk. Cassie screamed because That's what people are expected to do in that sort of situation. Victoria's eyeball popped with a sickening splat, and the pen drove into her brain. Cassie leapt from her seat, and when Mrs. Green came back into the room, and she pocketed the page that Victoria had been working on. After she had spoken to the police and her parents had taken her home, Cassie unfolded the blood-splattered page and smiled. On every line, Victoria had scribbled, "Have you seen the yellow sign?" Finally, the big day arrived. Though it wasn't going to Cassie's plan. She'd indeed been promoted, but to the role of Camilla, while her sister was playing her role as Casilda. It wasn't right, damn it. It just wasn't. She had fumed at John, but he hadn't listened to a single word. He was far too busy preparing to be the king. They had finished the first act. The last time Camilla had made an appearance, and it looked like Cassie's dream of landing her role was about to be forever dashed, as she sat and sulked, shooting daggers at her sister. Mr. Castaigne walked over and handed John a prop that he would need shortly, a box knife. Castaigne was about to leave when he saw the rage in Cassie's eyes. He handed her a prop and said, "You know what is required," with a lopsided smile. As the lights came back on, the crowd gasped at the ghoulish appearance of Casilda. It was a full house, and they were hanging on every word. Casilda crossed to where the king stood amongst the courtiers. Everyone on stage wore a mask. The play insists that everyone wears a mask. Everyone. Casilda spoke to the king. "My lord Hastur, will thee not remove thy mask as I do?" She gripped the corner of her mask and peeled it off with a disgusting slurp. The audience gasped once more as the figure under the pallid mask was revealed to be that of Cassie, her face caked in her dead sister's blood. The king spoke in reply. "My darling Cassie, I wear no mask." As the courtiers gasped in unison, "No mask! No mask!" the king lowered his hood. John's face was gone. In its place was a gaping maw that seethed with a mass of squirming tentacles. The crowd screamed as the ghastly form of dread Hastur unleashed his dreadful plague of madness and death upon all those in attendance. One by one, they murdered each other as Hastur took Casilda's hand. Finally, the room burst into flames as the lightning rig exploded. Laughing, the dreadful couple returned to dim Carcosa. The papers put the tragedy down to a faulty gas pipe. No copy of the script was ever recovered. The end. Excellent. Yeah, thank you. That was The Girl Who Hated Shakespeare from the Black Hare Press anthology, School's Inn. Yeah, I will answer some questions in a bit when I've just told you a little bit about this. So get them down in the comments section and I will answer them. Like I said, this is available in ebook, paperback, and a hardback copy, which hasn't actually turned up. Mine hasn't turned up yet because it was slightly delayed for some reason, but it's really cool. For this, they decided to do like a doodle thing for the hardback. So all those authors sent in some doodles and stuff like that. They're in the paperback as well, but they're actually on the cover in the hardback edition. It's really cool. So yeah, my story has got some of my like doodles here. You know, Mendees was here, you know, authentic. Yeah. So it's a quality little publication. That it's got a whole bunch of really cool stories by some really cool writers, really top writers, like David Green, Chris Banner. Yeah, I can't actually read. It's too dark. Anyway, yeah, have a look on the Amazon thing. It's a really cool one. Yes, so that was my second reading of one of my King in Yellow stories. Kind of a bit obsessed by King in Yellow. It's a mythos that runs parallel to the Cthulhu mythos by Robert W. Chambers. It was started by, and I've read a lot of King in Yellow stuff, and I have nobody, to my knowledge, or at least I haven't read one, has done a school play, because the King in Yellow is a play that sends people mad, and nobody had done it in a school setting. So when I saw the submission call go up for this from Black Hare Press, it was kind of like, had to be done. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing that one. Yeah, it was a good one. Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed it. And again, you can get hold of that by typing in getbook.app/schools in. But it's written school sin because there's no apostrophe, no space, all one word. It should be below in the information, either on the Facebook version or the YouTube version that will be going up later. Okay, so let's have a look at these things. Where's Hey, okay, yeah. Hello, David. How are you doing? Callum, big smiley face. Yeah. Hi, Jennifer. Yeah, excellent. Oh, David Green asks, what does the girl think of the modern day bard, Kenneth Branagh? To that, I raise my eyebrow. um, yeah. All I can't. I'm sorry. Have you seen Blackadder Back and Forth? It was one they did like a bunch of years after the end of Blackadder. They did like a feature length thing. It was a modern day Blackadder going through history and but basically like Doctor Who, and making a complete muck up of it. Uh, and he meets Shakespeare and kicks him in the groin and said that's for Kenneth Branagh's endless version of whatever. Yeah, so that's all that brings, man. Is that upside down? What, the yellow sign? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think I picked it up the wrong way round. Oh well. Hi, Karen. Yeah. Cheers, Mike. Yeah, thanks for turning up. Oh, yeah. As somebody who gives me good, odd ideas, how about Shakespeare versus Lovecraft? That was David Green. Funnily enough, if I can find it in the dark. Yeah. Funnily enough, there is Shakespeare versus Cthulhu. It's yeah, an anthology. It's got some really top names. It's really good. It was one of those that I kind of had to buy just because, just because. But yeah, it's got some really good names in it. It's got like Adrian Tchaikovsky and Andrew Lane and other people like that. But yeah, it's something I've on the cards. I will be doing one at some point. Because yeah, I actually had a short story accepted quite recently for an anthology, which is Avalon, you know, Arthurian legend mixed with the Cthulhu mythos. It had to be done. I'm so happy that that got accepted. uh, Thanks, Deborah. Cool. Yeah. Chris, you yeah. How many stories now link using this symbol? What stories that I've written? Four, three that are in print. About six in total. There will be more. There will be more. Yeah, you like back and forth. Yeah, it was brilliant. It was really funny. It was the Roman Legion bit. It just it cracks me up when they're all coming out with shorter and shorter skirts. Stephen Fry, that was so funny. Yes, yeah, we do. We do need the Cornwall version. Excellent. I, I'm glad everybody seemed to enjoy that. Um, yeah, I can't see any more questions. So again, just before I go, here we go with my incredibly high tech captions. Getbook.at/schools in for the anthology. You can follow my other live readings. They're all up on my YouTube channel, along with interviews and some other fun stuff. That's tinyurl.com/Tim Mendees YouTube. Can you read that? I don't know why I'm asking you. Nobody's going to reply. There we go. And my website, where you can keep up to date with all this kind of nonsense, is timmendeeswriter.wordpress.com. Okay, thank you again for tuning in. I should be doing another one fairly shortly. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. Thanks again. Take it easy. Good evening.